Welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast, where we talk about the emotional and spiritual aspects of the motherhood journey. We are a team of honest mamas. Myself, Melissa, Sophie, and Claire. We are psychotherapists, moms, and friends. Join us as we get real about the topics that matter to you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 26 of the Honest Mamas podcast. This is Claire. Today, I get to share a wonderful conversation I had with Kathleen Harper on the topic of finding more joy in motherhood. Kathleen is a writer, life coach, craniosacral and massage therapist, and the mom of 2 children. Kathleen comes to her work from a place of curiosity and from her own lived experience. I wanted her on the podcast because she embodies what Honest Mamas is all about. She shares her vulnerabilities and successes equally, and she doesn't shy away from talking about the hard parts of the motherhood journey. Kathleen's passion for supporting moms is on full display in today's episode. She has worked hard to understand what moms need in order to experience more joy and fulfillment in their lives from the inside out. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Kathleen as much as I did. Hi, Kathleen. Thank you so much for being with us today.
I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. I've really been looking forward to this conversation because it's a fun one. Today, we'll talk about how do we as moms cultivate more joy in our lives, which is, I think, an excellent question to answer.
It is. It's a hard question to answer, and it's an excellent one to focus on.
Yeah. So I thought we could start with a little bit about your background. I like to start with how people get to this place of thinking about, working with, and writing about motherhood.
Great. Well, what happened for me is that when my boys were young, I felt really isolated. I looked around and I saw all of these moms who were well-dressed and showered and all shiny on the outside. And I felt like I had missed an essential course on motherhood because I certainly didn't feel that way. I really felt like a mess most of the time. Mm-hmm. And it was very isolating. There was a lot of shame around that I wasn't enjoying motherhood as much as I should. Oh. And I didn't know what to do. And there was like so much embarrassment about not feeling like a good mom that I really didn't want to say anything to anybody. And so I felt more and more isolated. And once I started being brave in a really small way, with just one friend, and I started opening up to other moms, I realized how much company I had on, what I sometimes called Bad Mom Island, right? We all
live there sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes we take up permanent residence there, and sometimes, it feels like we're only visiting. But I realized how not alone I was in how I was feeling. And it really made me realize how much of a resource I could be for other moms. So I started studying life coaching and creating a community where moms did not have that feeling that I did, where I felt isolated and alone and like I was the only one that was struggling so much. Yeah. And so part of that became my blog. I also provide groups for moms where we get together once a month and combine coaching and crafts. So it's a way that moms can have a pleasurable experience as well as learning a new self-coaching tool. And really, and then I wrote a book about combining the coaching and the crafts and creating a resource for moms who weren't able to, I wouldn't be able to see individually. So that I could share some of what I've learned, some of the wisdom that I've come across from other people to support moms in their journeys.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you're talking, I'm aware that, sometimes these pain points in our lives are end up being our driving forces, as far as our passion projects and how we come to find our purpose. And I really resonate with, your initial experience of motherhood, just struggling and wondering, what did I miss? How did when did that course happen? And it wasn't on the baby registry. That's for sure. So I really resonate with that. And I'm grateful that you found that courage to reach out and start learning more and be the person to say to somebody, this is harder than I thought. And I feel really alone, because I think so many of us feel that and we don't say it, which unfortunately keeps us feeling isolated. So yeah. And so I think as moms, joy is something that can feel kind of distant for a while, particularly in those first years. How did you start to think about joy, or how did it come to you as something, as a way to move toward more happiness for yourself and for other moms?
For me, what happened is that I realized how much I needed to have time for myself. As an introvert, it's hard to be an introvert and a parent of young children, because you are never, ever alone, really. Mm-hmm. And I found that I really needed that time. And in couples counseling with my husband, I was able to negotiate with him a period of time every week where he would leave the house and take the boys. And, they were in preschool and in kindergarten. So he would drop them off and then stay out of the house. So I had that time to really figure out what it meant to nurture myself as a mom. And at first it just meant sleep. I would have all these ideas of what I needed to do, and I would fall asleep. I was so tired. But then it started evolving into really my hobbies, working on jewelry again and do-it-yourself projects. And that's one thing that I really recommend to the moms who I work with, is finding out how you can carve out little bits of time. And sometimes it comes in tiny fragments. But what can you do to fill that time that nurtures who you are now that you're a mom? And it might look really different than it did before you became a mom. Because, in the past, you could strap on your, tie up your running shoes and go for a really long run and get out all of that stress. But as a mom, you don't necessarily have that time anymore.
Right.
So how can you nurture yourself in ways that fit within your new lifestyle?
Right. Well, and I'm just thinking about, these fragments of time. How does one choose between, I have 15 minutes. Should I, put a load of laundry in? Or should
true.
I sit down and, journal or work on one of my jewelry pieces? Or, I feel like that choice point is there, and it's difficult to navigate, at least before you maybe realize how useful it is to choose the nurturing choice.
Yeah, because what we do is we default. If we have only 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, typically as moms, there's always so much to do that we default to chores, or we tell ourselves, I only have, 10 minutes, so I'm going to look at Facebook or I'm going to check email.
Right.
But those 15 minutes really add up. And if you can, I call it the mean manager that we have in our head. If you can convince the mean manager that the laundry will wait, then maybe what you can do is fill those 15 minutes with something that sustains you. One thing I recommend to moms is that we get these little pieces of time where we're waiting for our kids. Especially as our children are a little bit older and we're waiting for them to come out of school. We're waiting to pick them up from practice. And, I kept a coloring book and crayons and colored pencils in my car, so that when I was waiting to pick up one of my children, I could sit and color, because coloring activates the same part of your brain that a mindfulness practice does. And what I found, I felt really different after coloring for 5 minutes than I did after scrolling through Facebook for 5 minutes.
Wow. Yeah, that makes so much sense. As you were talking about the mean manager, I wanted to share, I've finally realized, it's taken a long time, but I finally realized that I will never be done with things that I need to do. The to-do list. It will never, ever, ever be done. And maybe there was a time in my life, 10, 20 years ago when the to-do list could get done. But with, kids and animals and a household and 2 businesses, like that, it's never going to happen. So for me, that's been a freeing thought, like, oh, I'm actually, running after something that's literally impossible. So the thought that that brings up to me this idea that we take these small pieces of time and begin to reconnect inside with the self that we are or the self that we were before kids. One thing I'm aware of that's happened in my own life is I went to, do something like that. And actually, all I really wanted to do was cry. All I really wanted to do was, or all I was able to do rather, was to feel the grief of the missing of myself, or the sadness that I had been so disconnected from joy, peace, and really connecting with me. So I just want to say that could happen for people and that it's okay. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you.
That's so true. The path to joy is strewn with emotions that are uncomfortable, like confusion and unhappiness and disappointment. And paradoxically, we think that the path to joy is all about feeling happy, and we're not supposed to feel grief. We're not supposed to feel unhappiness. Yeah. But if we shove those emotions under the rug, it really blocks our path to finding our joy. Yeah. The goal is to really allow the emotions to come up and give them room to be present so that we can then move beyond them.
Right.
Joy doesn't happen without all of the icky stuff that comes up in between.
But that's not how I thought about it, Kathleen.
It's not how any of us thought about it.
No, it's so interesting. Well, and I'm also imagining that maybe if women have those moments to try to think about what they want to do, they may find they're completely confused. Like, why? I have no idea. Do I want to color, or do I want to sit here and meditate? Do I want to listen to something like music? What I don't even know. And maybe they tap into things that, ways they didn't even know themselves before kids. So that could also be there.
Yeah. And that confusion, that uncertainty comes up a lot in my work with moms.
Really?
And it certainly came up for me. And the most important thing is to stop thinking and start doing. Like, you're not going to find your way by thinking about it. It's really about following your curiosity. And noticing, like, oh, is this fun? Do I like this? Am I having, and if you do that, if you follow your curiosity, you will find yourself again. It will absolutely happen.
Yeah.
And so that you have to make room for it.
As you're saying that, like, I find myself, my planning brain is coming in saying, what? Like, curiosity, and it's cool. It's like a cool experience to think about that. So that makes sense.
Yeah, we too. I think as for so many of us as moms, we are constantly thinking and planning, and because we have to. Because if we're not, sometimes our households will just fall apart. But in terms of finding yourself again, if you sit and think about it, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? It's really easy to get into this cycle of thinking and ruling things out in your head. Like, oh, I don't have time for that. Oh, that would be too much trouble. Oh, what a mess that's going to make.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one there.
Yeah. But if you give yourself a little bit of room to, like, well, I'm just going to try it. I'm just going to see how this feels. Because that's really how you find your joy, is you feel it.
Yeah.
You feel your way towards it. There's a coaching project, a craft project that I love to give to moms that's called the Joy Basket. And so somewhere in your house, in your kitchen or on your steps, put a little basket where it's somewhere that you walk by all the time, and have a notepad and a pen there. And every time you feel a little bit of joy, write it down. Like, what happened? Were you texting a girlfriend? Were you reading a book? Were you watching your child, delightedly figure out something new? Like, what was it that brought joy? And stick the little note in the basket. And after a period of time, at least a week, go back and go through your notes and see, like, what comes up, what's new, like, what are there patterns that show up in what you put into your joy basket. And that will help guide you to what comes next. Like, oh, I notice that when I am with friends, I feel joy. When I'm outside, I feel joy. And you can start building those back into your days on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's so fun. I'm wondering now, what would be in my basket?
But that's the thing is,
possibility.
Yeah, you don't think about it ahead of time. You allow it in. It's like, that moment, when we were outside with the kids and, just laughing and telling jokes. That was joy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, we had also spoken earlier in planning this podcast about expectations. How do you think expectations, play in on this scene?
Expectations really, William Shakespeare said that expectation is the root of all heartache. And I absolutely, completely agree with that. Mm-hmm. It gets into our expectation, not only of other people, but our expectations of ourselves get in the way of our happiness. There was a study that was done years ago by an Australian nurse named Carol McVeigh. And she looked at the expectations that mothers had before giving birth. And she found is that the higher a woman's expectation was about what parenting was going to be like and how much support she was going to have from the people around her, the deeper her disappointment was in the year after giving birth, regardless of what her circumstances were.
Wow.
And I think that is so true, that the more expectation we have of ourselves, of how it's supposed to look and how we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to feel, and the more expectation we have of the people around us, of how they're supposed to help us and support us, the greater our disappointment. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the way around that is to get really clear on what are the expectations I have for myself? What are the expectations I have for my spouse?
Yeah.
And by getting clear on that, you can start kind of cleaning up. I mean, I think of expectation as kind of dirty hope, right? Because it's usually not communicated very clearly about what our expectations are.
Yeah.
And so when my kids were in elementary school, they learned a skill called I messages, right? Where, if you have the expectation of your husband, like my husband should support me in keeping the house clean, right? You can always tell there's an expectation when it has one of those dirty words in there, like should or supposed to or have to. But to turn it into an I message, I want my husband or I want my spouse to support me more with housework. Mm-hmm. That gives you the opportunity to do something with it, to have a conversation, to sit down with a list of the chores and look at, who does what. And can you break it down a bit more equally so that you both have time to focus on the things that you really want to.
Right.
But shifting the dirty words to words that are a bit more clean, shifting supposed to into will. I'm supposed to get my chores done before I have time to do other things. That's a really hard expectation because, as you said earlier, chores are never done, right? It's a never ending process.
Yeah.
So how can you switch that around? I will give myself a little time before I do my chores to focus on the things that make me happy.
Yeah, my whole body relaxes when I hear that.
Yeah,
so
yeah, it is. It's a beautiful way of looking at yourself. Like I deserve my little bits of happiness that happen throughout my day.
Yeah.
And how can I build them in so that I can better care for the people around me and for myself?
Yeah, that gets into that self-care conversation about, I think, you shared this incredible quote with me, and I hope I get it right. You're only as happy as your unhappiest child, and how we put our needs last and everyone else's needs first. And it's such a natural inclination. But how do we reorient toward, my self-care helps me care for others?
Yeah, and it's a process. And one of the analogies that I like to share with my clients is imagine that you are the pantry, right? And everybody comes to you for sustenance.
Sounds right.
And if you're not constantly filling up your pantry, you're not going to have anything left for anyone else. It's going to be down to, shelving, right? It's like
some dried pasta.
Exactly.
Some spices, and that's it.
Yeah. And so to be able to find the things that, the moments, the activities that fill you up, for those of us who are introverts, it means finding time to really do very little, to be quiet and to be alone. Or if you're an extrovert, finding time to be around people so that you build up, grown-ups, to be around grown-ups.
Right, grown-ups.
So that you build up your energy resources so that you have more of that to give to other people.
So true. I wanted to go back to what you said before about I statements or is that what you said?
I messages.
Yeah. Because, I think in relationships with our partners as well as in parenthood, we kind of have these romantic visions. And you spoke to that about mom's expectations before birth, but we have these romantic visions of how life should be. There's that should word. And we think, well, it's, I want my husband or my partner to know that I want him or her to do the dishes. They should know. And if they don't know, it means something about our connection or it means something about them. So there's this idea that it's not very romantic to have to ask for things that you want. But I think what I wanted to point out about that is the difference between romance and actual true intimacy, and that they're on opposite sides of the spectrum. Romance can come through intimacy, but when we take the risk of really asking for what we deeply care about and what we deeply want, that's where our hearts can be met in a way that's really, truly nourishing and can be romantic. But it might not look like, mind reading. It might not look like, oh, we share exactly the same values and I get you 100%. That might not be what true intimacy looks like. So that's part of expectation, and it's part of being brave enough to ask for what you want, even though it might be hard.
Exactly. But the consequence of not asking for what you want is really all about resentment. Because what happens is when you don't ask for what you want and you think that he should know or, she should know what it is that would make you happy, it's really easy for resentment to build up.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to get burned out. And, there was a study that was done by Forbes Women in the Bump.com, and they found that 70% of working moms and nearly 70% of stay-at-home moms felt resentment towards their partners.
Oh.
And usually it was because of the imbalance of how much work was being done with parenting and around the house. Mm-hmm. It's that division of labor. It's the primary reason why resentment shows up. So that conversation about how you're divvying things up is really important. Mm-hmm. And I find that with my husband and I, we have to have it on a regular basis because things change. Oh. Our work, his work will spike or mine will, and we'll have to reevaluate like who's, handling the morning routine, who's handling the pickups and the driving. Because it's not a place where it stays the same. Right. Things change in our lives. So that conversation has to happen regularly.
Yeah. Right. And sometimes we need to be reminded, and we need to also offer reminders to our partners about what needs to happen in order for things to work well and to feel balanced. So yeah.
Sitting down with a list of, what needs to get done and how it can be equally balanced is not, as you said, not very romantic, but it can really build wonderful intimacy.
Yeah, so true. I want to touch on another aspect of self-care, which is the ability to say no in our lives as moms and as partners. Would you share a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think saying no is such an important part of staying sane as a mom. Okay. There are so many demands that are being put on moms right now, not just only from inside the home, but outside the home. Mm-hmm. From the school, from the preschool, from work. And it's really a matter of figuring out, because every time you say yes to something, you have to say no to something else. Because we all only have 168 hours in a week. And we want...
You've counted, yeah.
Yeah, I've counted. And a good portion of that we want to spend on sleeping too, right? So how do you figure out what fits into your precious time? And I think it's really amazing to be able to say, let me think about it. When there's somebody asking for a piece of your time, whether it's to volunteer for a project or take on another responsibility at work, or, help with a carpool, whatever the request is, but give yourself time to step away from the request and think about it and see how it feels. Does it feel like, oh, this feels like a definite yes? Because your body always knows whether it's yes or whether it's no. We have a natural way, our bodies tighten up when something feels like a no. And for some people, it's a tightness in the throat. Another, it's like a stone deep into your stomach, or your shoulders, or getting closer to your ears. There's ways that our bodies tell us, like, this feels like a no. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the way we're raised as women in this culture, we want to help and we want to please and we want to make sure that people around us are happy. So saying no isn't something that comes naturally for many, many women.
Yeah.
So giving yourself distance from it to check in, because we might automatically say yes when the answer really, really feels like a no.
Yeah.
With my clients, a lot of times I talk about how, like, imagine that you and your family are in the basket of a hot air balloon, and it's heavy. And, what are you going to throw overboard so that you don't crash?
Not your family members. Wait, am I missing something? What's in the basket with you?
All of your responsibilities.
Oh, okay. I thought it was just the family and you.
Oh, no. You, your family, and everything. My firstborn.
Over the edge. Okay, sorry. So it's all of your responsibilities and your family.
And your family are in this basket. So how are you going to get ballast? Like, I have one client who is farming out the laundry. She doesn't do her family's laundry anymore because she works full time. She has 2 small ones, and there's no way she can just fit that in. It's one thing that she just can find somebody else to do it. Wow. What can you delegate?
Right. That makes sense.
It's really important to figure out, like, what doesn't feel like yes, so that you can focus on the things that really do matter.
Yeah. That's great advice. Yeah. I mean, strangely enough, laundry was up in my own mind yesterday because it takes about, I would say, 6 hours a week between, putting it in, running it, folding it, and putting it away. And I'm in that inquiry, like, do I have time for this? I'm not sure. So it's still something I'm sitting with, but we take there's kind of these tasks that we take for granted, like, oh, this has to happen, therefore I have to do it. Or, the family has to do it as a group or whatever. But yeah, there's so many little things like that we don't realize how much actual time they take. Of that 160, how many hours a week?
168.
168 hours. That's incredible.
Yeah, that it doesn't seem like that much. When you start calculating, like, ideally, like, we would love to all have 8 hours of sleep a night.
Yeah. Right.
It doesn't leave you with a whole lot of hours. And then if you factor in your work, it's I had one client, we were doing this exercise of, like, okay, like, how much time do things take? And, and she came up with probably about 250 hours. I'm like, okay, so where are you going to fit these?
Oh my gosh, that makes,
something has to go.
Something's got to go.
Lots of things have to go in order for it. No wonder you feel like you're insane.
Right. Yeah. Well, I must have been in this inquiry in advance in preparation for this interview, because I'm living that reality of that tension and really looking at that. And, there have been times in the past months where I've had about, a half an hour a day to choose, to choose what I want to do. And it's not enough. It's just not enough. So
it's not. And what I talk to people about is, figuring out, like, what can you delegate?
Right.
What can and really it's about what you don't want to do, what just has to be done. So high in importance, low in desirability, those are great things to delegate to somebody. And then what can you ditch? The things that aren't important really, and that aren't, very desirable for you to do. What can you just throw them out of the basket?
Right.
For me, what I realized when my kids were in elementary school was that I was spending about 15 minutes a day just chatting with other moms after drop off. And a lot of times it was like gossipy sometimes, or it didn't nurture me. And I really, by focusing on it, I realized, like, this isn't nurturing me. And by not spending those 15 minutes, I got quite a lot of time over the course of a week.
Right.
And so noticing those little bits of time where you can ditch whatever it is, or those big projects that you can say, like, I can't do this right now. This isn't something that is, serving me or my family.
Right.
In my family, we talk about, does it feed your soul or feed your family? So feeding your family it's literally, dinner and going grocery shopping, but it's also making the house run really smoothly. Like all of the things that make life go very, very smoothly, that's feeding your family. And then there's the feeding your soul. And those are the things, like with our kids, when they have activities that they want to do, is this something that's going to feed your soul? Or is it something that you just want to do, right? Because your friends are doing it.
Right. Really making that distinction and taking the time to feel into that.
Right. And for my husband and I too, is this course that we want to take, is, this activity that we want to do as a family, does it feed our soul, our collective soul as a family? And so that's really how we look at things. Does it feed our soul or does it feed the family?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, and it's interesting because sometimes the things that you think are feeding you actually aren't. And when you slow down, you learn that, like you said, for you, talking didn't feed you. And maybe for someone else it does. But we kind of have these ideas like, oh, if I go to my yoga class, that will feed me because yoga feeds you, right? Feeds your soul. Well, does it feed your soul? Your soul? Is that really true for you? So taking the time to honestly evaluate something and get rid of the cultural conditioning about what we should do. Or
it gets back to those dirty words, right? Should, supposed to, have to.
Yeah.
To really notice where those are showing up. And I should go to yoga because yoga is really good for me.
Right. When what you really want to do is lay on your bed, spread eagle and not talk to anyone and not move.
Right. That would be a better way of feeding your soul. If you're feeling really overwhelmed, that if your soul is saying, just please lie down. I just really need you to lie down.
Don't move. Yeah.
You can do, corpse pose on your bed all by yourself.
Right. You don't need to go
There's
anywhere.
Your yoga.
Right. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about a concept that you have about inner circle friends? What does that mean? Well,
what it means for me is it's really important for us to have close friendships. It's, they've done a lot of research on loneliness recently. And what they're noticing is that people are more lonely now than they were even 15 years ago. Friendships have kind of fallen apart in this new age of technology that we have. And what I like to think about is you have a certain number of friends that you can have just based on the size of your brain. There's a British anthropologist who found that the size of our brain influences how big our circle of friends are. In the primate world. And so with humans, it's about 150 people. That's called the Dunbar Number. And within that 150, you can have 5 really as your inner circle, your closest friends. And then the rings get wider and bigger as the intimacy gets further out. And I like to use the analogy of a house. So we have our friends who are like sidewalk friends. So people who you'd wave to and you'd say hello to, but you wouldn't necessarily invite into the more inner reaches, inner parts of your home.
Yeah.
And those 5 intimate friends would be like your bedroom friends, the people that you would invite into your bedroom, the most intimate place of your home.
Right.
And then we have kitchen friends who we would invite into our homes, but maybe not have that certain same level of intimacy that we would with the 5 on the very inner circle.
Oh.
And it's so important as we're making friends because motherhood is a time of huge transition. And we tend to, the friends who don't have children maybe aren't as intimate with us anymore because maybe they don't understand the demands that motherhood places on our time.
Yeah.
And so as we are figuring out who is our inner circle friends, it means bringing someone from the sidewalk, onto the porch. by slowly managing our intimacy, reaching out and seeing if our bid for friendship is reciprocated. And if, like the bid could be, hey, you want to go for coffee? Or, maybe sharing something that was challenging and seeing if it's that challenging, that intimacy is then shared. And then they become, and then they come and maybe become, a family room friend. So slowly managing that friendship process, that getting to know you in a way that feels safe, in a way that feels reciprocated, so that, we can have those 5 close friends supporting us in that inner circle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I find that motherhood and, once you get into the school years, there is a lot of vulnerability just in making those bids for friendship too, because oftentimes, you're going to see people at school. So you can make these bids and if they're not reciprocated, sometimes that can be difficult. It can be harder to make the bid because, if this person rejects me or if they're not in sync with me, I'm still going to see them and that's okay. But I think it can be extra challenging for moms when we don't have a lot of time and we also have, a need for intimacy and the need to be vulnerable, but also there's these kind of new social rules and these new social engagements that are happening. It's definitely an area I want to think about more and understand more. But I appreciate this analogy as a way to kind of hold all of that.
And one way to think about it in a very self-care sort of way is that if your bid for friendship isn't reciprocated, it could mean that other person's Dunbar number is full, right? They already have their 5 inner circle friends, and then the 15 out, the next circle of 15, there may just not be room. And it's not something we consciously think of, but it's something that our brains automatically do. Like, oh, there's no room. We're full here.
Yeah.
So to think about it from that perspective, it's not a matter of being shunned or
good enough.
Your bid not being appreciated. It's more perhaps that they're full. Their Dunbar number is full right now.
Right. Oh, that's a lovely way to hold it. And I think as we age, and a lot of us, I had kids a little bit on the later side, some of us have had lots of time to reach that Dunbar number,
Yes.
So we may have friends from, inner circle friends, from many parts of our lives or many phases in our lives that kind of rotate in and out also. So yeah, it's really, really interesting concept. Wow. Oh, well, Kathleen, I am just so grateful for your time and your expertise, and it's been a lot of fun and I've learned a lot. So thank you so much for joining us. I know as well you wanted to offer a free PDF of your book, The Well-Crafted Mom, to people who are interested. How can they get a copy?
The best way that people can get a copy, a free PDF of The Well-Crafted Mom, is to shoot me an email to thewellcraftedmom@gmail.com. And all you have to do is put book in the subject line. You don't need to put anything else in the content of I know you're all busy, so you don't need to put anything else in the email. Just put book in the subject line, and I will send you a free PDF of The Well-Crafted Mom.
Oh, well, that is a very generous offer. So thank you in advance for everyone who benefits from that. And I really, like I said, I'm just so grateful for spending time with you. So thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you. It was a delight talking to you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. I am grateful to Kathleen for coming on and sharing her well-earned wisdom with all of us. Even in the hours since our conversation, I noticed myself looking at some aspects of my life and my day differently. I'm noticing the joyful moments and feeling into those moments more deeply. My hope is that all of you learn something new today that sparks your own curiosity and creates an opening to more joy and fulfillment in your own life. To get our show notes, sign up for our e-course, or get more information, go to www.honestmamas.com/episode 26. Also, join our community on Facebook by going to www.facebook.com facebook.com/Honest Mamas Community, where these conversations will continue.